Okay, Chairman, you can begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Planning Policy Committee to be held virtually today on Monday, the 8th of February 2021. It's not a long agenda tonight, so hopefully it won't be a tremendously long meeting, but one can never totally tell. So without further ado, let's move to any apologies for absence, please. Agenda item 1.
Yes, we've had apologies for absence from Councillor Stephen North.
Thank you. Okay, then turning now agenda item 2 to the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January 2021, not just 2 weeks ago. And can I virtually sign these off as a true record of the meeting held on the 27th?
Proposed.
Thank you. Any second? Thank you.
Indeed.
All those in favour?
Yes.
Are there any comments as to the accuracy of those minutes? There are not. Michael, you're being invaded. Excellent. Right, well, in that case, we move then to agenda item 3 to receive any declarations of interest. Okay, I do not hear any. If anybody wants to speak, if they can obviously use the chat function, which I do have open. I meant to say that before, but if anybody would like to speak, please indicate. But lovely. Agenda item 4, questions by members under Council Procedure Rule 10.3. Have we received any?
No questions received, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. Then we now move to the one item of substantive business, agenda item 5, which is residential annexes draft supplementary planning document, and that's going to be taken through by Anne. So the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, everyone. Hopefully this won't take too long for you. If you remember, in June of 2020, the Council adopted the Residential Extensions and Alterations Supplementary Planning Document, which had replaced the former 1998 Design Guide. And since the adoption of this, development management officers have identified a need for additional information to cover schemes involving residential annexes. This is a common form of development, often called granny annexes, for obvious reasons, and these buildings or extensions within the curtilage of a residential dwelling are generally proposed to allow family members to live with their family, but with a certain degree of independence. The proposed supplementary planning document before you this evening would provide supplementary guidance to officers and applicants for the determination of planning applications and for inquiries for pre-application advice. The main topics covered within the document, and I've got a list here, is defining residential annexes, is planning permission required, permitted development rights, will permission be granted for my annex, heritage assets and the setting of heritage assets, other outbuildings or extensions for incidental use, modular or mobile home providers approach, national space standards, and how this document relates to the householder extensions document of 2020. So to conclude, members' approval is sought to undertake a public consultation on the draft guidance document with a view to adopting it as a supplementary planning document or SPD. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne, and very clear report. Are there any questions at this stage? Councillor Mercer, please.
So I can't remember. I saw a date when it was going. Well, when the consultation is due to end. I just wondered where it was with relation to the council's existence.
The consultation will last for 4 weeks, and we're hoping to get this started either by the end of this week or the beginning of next. It's a logistics exercise at this point, just to check with all the copy dates for the newspapers, etc., and comms will need to be involved. So we can't tell you exactly at this point.
So when that consultation ends, what is the procedure from then on? Is there anything we need to do from then?
Richard can take this, if you wouldn't mind, Richard. What happens when we get to the end of this? It's yet to be defined, but we hope at that point that we could go to full council, which is something that's been discussed, but we're not sure about whether this will fit logistically, because the timings are very tight, as you know, with Purdah coming up now, the elections are being run. Is there would you want to add anything to that, Richard?
And through you, Chair, if I can try and clarify that. Yeah, we aim to certainly look at the 4-week consultation, which is within the parameters of the statement of consultation. The statement of community involvement, which would allow us to start now. And it's whether or not you can continue within Purdah. Now, if we can start pretty quickly, and this does depend, as Anne mentioned, on placing press adverts and being able to get a report to what effectively would be your final meeting, which would be the full council, which I think is around the 23rd of March, something around that. You'll know better than me the absolute date of it. So we need to know again how much time we'd have to turn it round after that. If we can do that, we will. We'll have a look at that. If we can't, what the aim then would be to obviously undertake the consultation, and we would feed that back to the next meeting that basically takes on board policy committee work after the end of East Northants. So that would be the first meeting of the new unitary. It really does depend on the issues of the press notices and the lead-in time to the council, and indeed whether or not it's an appropriate item to take to council. So there's a number of things we'd need to look into. If we can do it, we'll do it. It'd be nice to get something through and adopted before the end of this council. If we can't, it would have to go into the first meeting of the new unitary.
The last meeting of the council is actually the 29th of March. So it gives you another week.
I thought it was the 22nd.
Excuse me, Chairman, the date of that council meeting's been brought forward a week to the 22nd.
Oh, okay, my calendar's out of date then, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, apologies. Okay. Right, I've got Councillor Jenny and then Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Jenny, please.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was going to pick up on that date. Secondly, Richard, I think, has probably covered off an allowance for 4-week consultation period. That's not our normal practice. Our normal practice is normally 6 weeks, so bear that in mind. And then there is no way that we will allow this whatsoever to get involved in Purdah. And Purdah starts, I think it's the Thursday after the full council meeting.
Well,
That is well, unless the government changes their mind about the 6th of May, that's the timetable we have to work to tonight.
as I understood it, you are not supposed, under the Local Government Association guidance regarding Purdah, you cannot start a consultation during the Purdah period, but there is nothing to stop you receiving the results of a consultation on presumably a highly uncontroversial document. But obviously that's a matter for the monitoring officer to discuss. Richard,
Right.
do you want to come back?
That is right, David.
Yeah. Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just to clarify that point on the 4 weeks. Councillor Jenny is correct on that. Normally we would run 6 weeks consultation, but we had a look at this carefully because the statement of community involvement states that unless legislation allows otherwise, and legislation for SPDs allows between 4 to 6 weeks. So we're not we're in the spirit. We're not sort of going against guidance or our own SCI, if you like, by doing 4 weeks. It's perfectly acceptable. Yeah, that was one of the questions, really, I suppose. You know, if councillors accept the 4 weeks, if we run it 4 to 6 weeks, quite often we don't get representations back till about the last week, whether it, you know, whatever the length of the consultation period is, because this is something quite focused, and we have done consultation in the past on the residential extensions, of which this is a sort of addition to. We feel that we've got pretty much of a focus field that we would go out and put notification of the consultation to agents, for example, and we would normally get those back, I think, within a month. I think that's fair, but that's just by way of explanation, really, why we feel that the 4 weeks is appropriate, and that way it avoids PERDA as well, as Councillor Jenny mentioned. So that's the background to that, really.
Okay,
Thank you.
Richard. Okay, Councillor Maxwell, please.
My question, Chair, is to Richard, actually. How are you actually going to carry out this consultation? Will it be through the internet, or actually are you sending it out via the post?
Richard?
Yep, Chair. Yes, normally we would we use electronic communication, so we've got a database and we've got a lot of emails on there, and it will be a very similar way we run it as to when we did the residential extensions one previously. A lot of it will be online. All the parish councils, town councils, again, we've got their email addresses. Majority that we get back these days anyway are through email addresses, so it doesn't really affect it too much being within COVID. We've done a couple, well, more than a couple, we've done a handful of consultations now during various sort of degrees of lockdown. So unfortunately, the main thing is we can't, not that we'd have any exhibitions as such for this, but we can't do much more than electronic communication. We wouldn't have documents in libraries, for example, and we can send documents out to town councils and parish councils, but again, the preference probably would be to do them electronically. If there is a request to do a hard copy, then yeah, of course we can do those as well. I think the main thing is to just make sure that the website is functioning fine, and that people can find it and that it works okay for them in terms of, A, reading it, and then B, responding to it on forms as well, because that's the other thing. I mean, Anne might want to add something on that, because we know we've used forms in the past to help the responses, but we certainly wouldn't rule out people writing in or any other sort of form of communication, if you like. We've took phone calls in the past as well, so we're open to as much as we can do, but inevitably most of it's online now.
The only thing I would say is that I did speak to parish council last week, and none of them are on the internet, so I thought that was quite interesting. So there clearly is an issue where some parish councils don't use the internet.
How do they have their meetings, or one wonders?
Well, they don't.
Oh.
Are these the small parish meetings, perhaps? I don't know, but
No, they haven't had one.
Right, Councillor Jenny, please. You're waving. I'm sorry, Councillor Lewis. I do note you've signalled first.
I think Councillor Lewis will probably pick this up as leading member of NCALC. But in my role as looking after the unitary, the rural affairs for Unitary, I've been given a list of all the parish councils in Northamptonshire, which includes every parish clerk's email address.
Okay, Councillor Lewis, please. Sorry, Richard. Councillor Jenny, you wanted to finish saying something?
Well, just basically to say they all work by email.
Okay, Councillor Lewis, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My questions are slightly more fundamental about the whole concept of this paper. I've been married for 57 years now, and for 30 of those years we've been what I would call child-free. The three have more or less flown, and we have a little gaggle of small and larger ones ranging up to 22 years old now. and I've consulted the granny in the house this evening. And the thing about this is that if either of us were in a position where we wish to avail ourselves of such a facility, the first thing as I read this is that we would really lose our independence. This wants, as it does say on page 114, with a degree of independence. Well, the thing that we've had forever has been independence. And on page 2.3, it does say does not have any adverse impact on the living conditions of the main house stroke adjoining occupiers. I can assure you that if I had to move in and share facilities like lounges or toilets or kitchens, that would certainly have an adverse effect on the occupiers, because it'd be rather like when grandson moved in for 6 months, you couldn't ignore him because he was in the bloody, he was in the way a lot of the time, and so on. And when you go on to page 12, table 1, where you say share main function of the host dwelling, well, this is all losing independence. I think old people, you know, they need some independence. I could convert my garage into a bedroom and a little kitchen and a little lounge and so on, and I would walk 2 yards and I'd be in the main house. And I think really you're not quite coming from the right direction as to what grannies and maybe granddads actually want, because this is forcing them to some extent to lose their independence. I think you need to leave the option open that you have a granny flat in effect, as opposed to just something where, you know, I mean, old people can smell. Maybe you hadn't noticed that. And, you know, sometimes they'd like to have their own chairs somewhere tucked away and so on. So, you know, that's where I think it needs to be more open than it is. You know, I just think you've got slightly wrong concept of grannies and granddads and to how independent they are. You look at how many old people. My next door neighbour, she's about 86. She lives in a large 4-bedroom detached house. I mean, for her to move in with one of her kids and share facilities, she wouldn't do it in 1,000 years, and nor would my wife. So I just think it needs a bit of a rethink. I'd be quite happy for it to send it out, but they're the sort of comments that I think I'd like to make. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for going on so long.
Not at all. Thank you very much. And actually, I think I was in fact going to latch on to paragraph 4.6, and we've discussed this before, but again, I think it's somewhat in support of Councillor Lewis's very eloquent words. I don't like the rather prescriptive nature of the. I appreciate it's a sort of explanation rather than policy, but the definition of a kitchenette, such as a kettle, a bleak microwave, a bleak small fridge, is not acceptable in my mind. If you're going to, you know, I think you can still have an annex where old or disabled or other people might live that has something of a functional kitchen. I appreciate the distinction between having another residence. I do understand that distinction and it being an annex, but I think that, you know, decent facilities should not be frowned upon, and certainly a microwave in my mind is not sufficient to be cooking facilities. So that's my thought on that. The other point I wanted to make, and again Anne and I discussed it, is something just to put in, perhaps along with the SPD we did some time ago regarding extensions, that any annex should be suitably distant from boundaries where possible. And I know there is guidance on that, so perhaps that's something to take into consideration as well. Okay, anybody else wish to speak to this? Councillor Maxwell, please.
Well, I think my view is looking at the actual annex building is what you wouldn't want is, as Councillor Lewis has just pointed out, that the person who has to go and live in this annex should be the person who makes the decisions about how this extension actually occurs and the size and what goes into it, because they're the people who should be making the decisions. It shouldn't be for somebody else to make the decisions of an annex if the house itself belongs to them originally. I think there has to be more, I think they should have more control over how they live in the future if they have to go in to one of these annex. And I just feel that that should be, I know you can't actually imply, you can't actually say that the person should have rights, but I think somewhere along the line where you've got good quality in 2.3, good quality adjoining occupiers, well, who actually makes sure that the quality meets the person who's going to live there? That's my question, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. It's okay. I mean, obviously, who makes the decision about building the annex and fitting it out would, I hope, be something of a cooperative decision. Okay, Anne, did you want to come back on that or any of the other comments?
Yes, I can come back. Basically, this whole document has been driven by the development management team. And one of the main definitions of a residential annex is that it is ancillary to the main dwelling, and there should be some degree of independence, but there should also be some, how would I put it? There should be some dependence on the main dwelling. That is the whole idea of it being ancillary. If it becomes separate and you have a big enough plot there, you would be looking to be building a whole new house. And this is something that development management have fed back, and myself when I was in the department, we had this a few times. You're basically creating something that is supposedly ancillary, but if it's all kitted out so it can be very separate. You can separate the outside amenity, you can separate all the uses of that property. It could actually turn out to be tantamount to a new dwelling. And it has happened in the past that ownership changes hands and then the property, the ancillary annex, is let out or even sold off as a separate dwelling. And this is more of a problem in the open countryside. So basically they wanted to outline all the different options and say that the idea of it being dependent with a kitchenette was the ideal. But if you look after paragraph 1.4, there's an illustration there. This is actually one on Newton Road in Rushden, and this is an annex which has been built above an existing three-port garage with a lift. And obviously the person that was going to live there has some disabilities and needs a lift to get to that annex and isn't as able to get back into the main dwelling to use their facilities. So they have a little more of a kitchen. It's possibly a bit more than a kitchenette. And the idea from DM was that they'd all be look at all of these on a case-by-case basis based on the circumstances of the owners and the proposed inhabitant of the annex.
Yeah, well, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Boto, then Councillor Lewis, then Councillor Peacock. So Councillor Boto, please.
You're on mute, Councillor.
You're on mute, Councillor. A song for you this year, isn't it? You're on mute. Councillor Boto.
You're very quiet, Councillor Boto.
You're not much.
Something with the microphone then.
Lean into it and shout.
So,
Can just, Councillor Boto, we can just hear your voice, but we can't really hear what you're saying.
working properly. Got that? Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
No, well, we can sort of hear you when you just shouted hello, but only just.
Is this any better?
Yes, a little bit.
I lost my words now. Yes. I'm concerned about this kitchenette issue, which Councillor Lewis has raised and we spoke about this morning with Anne. I agree that I think that an older person with some independence would, I think, want more than the kitchenette. In many circumstances, I think a small kitchen would be required, and as Anne's just pointed out in the example showing in the documents here, there is an example of a lift for a disabled person with a larger kitchen. Now, since people wishing to install an annex are recommended to discuss with the planners whether or not planning permission will be required, is it surely not possible for those persons to be advised that they can have a larger kitchen, but there's a condition of the agreement is they cannot sell that on to a person who might want to separate the properties? Can some sort of restriction be put on that property being separately sold and the two separated into two separate pieces of accommodation? So I really don't, I'm not at all happy about this bar on anything bigger than a toaster and a saucepan or something.
I think it's only a bar in guidance rather than a bar in policy. But Anne, would you like to come back on that?
Yes, we have actually got some suggested conditions at the back end of the document, and that is one of those conditions is such. Unfortunately, sometimes conditions are difficult to enforce, so there has to be some degree of I suppose assurance on the behalf of the determining officer that this is not being planned to be a separate dwelling in the future, and so that there's actually conditions which cover the fact that it can't be used as a separate, there can't be a subdivision, no creation of a new dwelling. There's also for parking also that there's enough parking. So there's actually these conditions, these are sample conditions which are applied and they can be useful. But as Councillor Boto said, pre-application advice is recommended throughout all of this document, this guidance, so that the applicant can engage with the planners at an early stage, so that something can, you know, some compromise or everyone can get exactly what they want without it falling into the wrong hands at a later date and becoming a new dwelling.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, did you want to add to that?
Yes, please, Chair. I think, you know, we have to be a little bit careful. I think that's why we've adopted a cautious approach to this, because there is another side to this, and that's not every. I don't say not everyone's genuine. That's the wrong thing to say, but I think Anne's explained a couple of situations rather where it might not. What we might want to be achieving here is probably not occurring, particularly where dwellings are sold on and there's the opportunity for somebody to take advantage of a separate dwelling. I mean, I know Councillor Boto mentioned a large kitchen, but it is really for one person. I don't sort of see that we should be starting off at that level of the spectrum. It really should be, look, there is an opportunity here. It's for somebody who's dependent on the household. It's somebody who's part of that household, and it's how far you define that independence, if you like. It's a sort of stepping stone. We're not sort of creating a separate unit as such. It probably needs to be seen in that light, because conditions are one thing, but enforcing those, you know, extremely difficult. If you've got an independent situation within a rural area, to some degree, the enforcement officers are going to, you know, rely on somebody sort of raising this, because it's very, very difficult to monitor. And I think we just need to be a little bit careful about what we might create here if we're too open about what we allow from the document. I think Anne's right, you know, where we can, we certainly will be creative, and the sort of design, if you like, or the example in the document, it just showed that can be quite creative at times. But I think we need to be quite cautious over this as well. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I think your point is well made. Obviously, you know, we mustn't go from a point of departure where an annex is more than an annex. And it just interests me about the independence of the occupant of the annex and the facilities available. Councillor Lewis wanted to come back.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think, Anne, you've explained it all then. Development management. What we're doing here is trying to catch people out doing things for their houses rather than considering what we're actually doing for old people. It's the older people we're trying to look after here. And I think, for instance, if somebody built a 5-bedroomed property with 3 reception, 4 bathrooms and 2 kitchens, one of each of which of those different rooms was used by an older person, it would be rated as one property. It would just be a large house. And I can't really see, should we be worrying about a few people who actually build a lump on the house? And development management are trying to classify as 2 properties, whereas really it's one large property. I think we're coming in from the wrong way. And I think as far as selling things on, I can't say how you can control that really. Same with disabled facilities grants. We can spend £30,000 there, and very difficult to say we're going to get that money back when the property is sold on. It's sold on. And I think if you look at some of my old aunt years back stayed at Victoria Road in Rushden, and they improved those properties to give people a better living space, not just sharing everything, but giving the individuals, some of their own space. And I think that's what we need. They need this independent. And I don't think this should be development management driven. It should be older persons driven. So I'm afraid that's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anne, did you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lewis, and very interesting viewpoint, which I will feed back, obviously, to development management. The document is slightly wider, although they're called granny annexes, but in modern living, we're finding that they're being used by students. I think you mentioned your grandson, people returning after university and wanting their own space within the family home. There are people that need carers, and the carer needs an annex to live in, but has some degree of dependence on the main house. They may do their washing in there, but they need a small kitchen and an ensuite bathroom so that they don't have to share bathroom space with the family. The outside space in an ancillary annex should be shared to make it ancillary rather than it being subdivided. But obviously, if it was to be an old person and they need their own little patio and they want their own bit of garden, that could also be accommodated. It's a slightly wider document. It is the Granny Annex is the name that it's usually called, but it's become much more widely used in the present day.
Yeah,
which I think is a good concept. How young children or grandchildren are going to get on the housing ladder nowadays might want somewhere to lodge. Well, I prefer not to lodge in my chair all the time.
Wise remarks indeed. No, okay. I think that's a good point. The scope that an annex can be, it isn't one sort of user only. So certainly it's a well-made point. And did you want to come back again, Councillor Lewis?
All right, couldn't get the mouse to work properly there. Sorry about that. No, if the comments are taken back, and I appreciate, there's a wider context here, and but I think it's a pity that if it's just being chased by development management, then it is coming in from slightly the wrong direction.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councillor Peacock, please.
Thank you. Yes, I hear what everybody's saying, but for a long time now we've asked for a document or an SPD to cover this issue because over the years, we've had lots of things that have come in as granny annexes, and they've ended up being developed into bungalows and extended upon extension. And not so long ago, we've had one at recent that's from Town Council, and probably this document might have helped some of the members make a decision. I hear what you're saying, but it does need to be ancillary. I appreciate it is a downsizing exercise, and often that person does need less space. I do agree they would probably need a better kitchen facilities, because if they're having carers in and they need somebody to prepare a meal for them, then you can't just microwave everything, and it is nice to have proper meals cooked in an oven. I appreciate that. I think this needs to go out with the rider. I mean, the whole point of tonight is for it to go out for consultation and to see what comes back. We've got the paragraph at the back, as Anna says, about conditions that can be added. And I think each case then can be looked at in, depending on what they want. And if they don't fall into this, then they can go for a separate building for a bungalow or whatever's required to suit their requirements. But at least it gives a middle stop, I think, from living in the house to ancillary or a separate building altogether. So it just probably feels a bit of a grey area and gives something a bit more, gives us as planners and developers, as members, to control some of the development, especially in the open countryside, which over the years we know we've been duped, but we haven't had those powers to help control some of these issues.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I think that's helpful. Did you want to come back, Anne or Richard? You're on mute.
Nothing from me, Chair.
Okay, and you're on mute. Mute.
Yeah. It's working now. Sorry about that. Yes, as Councillor Peacock said, having served her time with development management and enforcement issues, it did originate to help our development management colleagues, because it has become a problem. But as Councillor Lewis had pointed out, families are now becoming much bigger, extended families using the same property, the same dwelling, and the boundaries around the dwelling, that curtilage, can be used to support them throughout their years in more ways than one. So I appreciate Councillor Peacock's comments from experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Splendid. Councillor Boto, please. No. I don't know what you did last time, Councillor, but you need to do it again. No, Tony, can't hear you.
Can he type the question through to you, Chairman? Could he type the question through to you on chat?
Can you type your question, Councillor Boto? If we can't hear you very soon.
Well, it's still no better.
No, that's better. That's better.
Better now.
Yes.
Right.
Shoot.
All I wanted to suggest was that if you look at paragraph 4.6, it does, in my view, rather over-egg this size of kitchen issue, kitchenette issue, etc. If this document is going to go out in the next couple of days, if this committee is about to agree to this report, is it possible for that to be toned down somewhat insofar as this kitchenette bit, to allow a greater degree of discretion? Because it looks pretty rigid to me in terms of how it's phrased. And obviously that paragraph is really saying you can't have a kitchen. And it shouldn't say that. It should give some degree of flexibility on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, I think that comment has been taken into consideration, has it not, Anne? Perfect. Okay, Councillor Carter, please.
Yeah, it was just really a bit of what everybody has already said, but my thinking is I have a niece who's a live-in nanny with a family, and they moved to Devon, and she was, if you like, in an annex, but obviously because she wasn't coming home, obviously needed the facility to be able to live independently, if you like, separate from that family. So like Richard, you know, when you talk about basics in a scenario like that, and understand what Sarah's saying, in that yes, each case should probably be looked at individually, and also another scenario of a disabled person wanting to live separately and being able to do that bit of cooking. So I think there has to be that bit of leeway for both those instances, Chair.
Well, thank you very much. This has actually been a very interesting debate, and I think, you know, it's one of these SPDs in a reasonably non-controversial way. But actually, when you actually turn it upside down and look into it, there's quite a lot of very interesting stuff in it. So I much appreciate all the wise comments that have been made by members on this. Okay, is there anybody else who would like to speak to this? Councillor Maxwell, I see.
Well, I wondered if actually the person who may be in this annex could actually be in a wheelchair. So therefore, accessibility to cook to actually have a meal or be independent could actually prevent them if this little kitchenette doesn't allow a wheelchair to get in there. And secondly, I'm not sure why we have to say small fridge, why we just don't put fridge, because not everybody wants a small fridge, they want a normal type fridge. So I think that, I'm not saying I just feel that we, in this kitchenette that seems to be quite controversial, we ought to really think about the bigger picture, that if the person is in a wheelchair and has a disability, they want to be able to get in there and be independent. That's my view.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Maxwell. I mean, obviously, every annex will be built to the requirements of whoever it is that needs it. But Richard, would you like to clarify just where we are on Councillor Maxwell's remarks?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's a couple of things really. I think I certainly agree with your last comment, actually, that yes, it would be built around that particular person. Obviously, some annexes wouldn't have the size and opportunity to be able to be built to all standards, so we'd need to look at that. And I think, you know, the applicants, if you like, would need to take that into consideration as well. Clearly, there'll be some opportunities where they can be properly provided. In others, you know, we might be talking about a lot less room, so that would all need to be looked at very, very carefully, particularly in relation to building regulations, of course, as well. But what I would say, which a number of the councillors have talked about, is this paragraph 4.6 in the kitchen sort of facilities and stuff. Yeah, we'll have a further look at that before we put it out to consultation, and I think we'll be looking very carefully at how we word that, so it doesn't necessarily opens it up to a large kitchen that could feed a family, if you like, but it is more in line with an independent living. I fully take on the point about sort of microwave living, and you know, there are other issues around sort of cooking fresh food and stuff. We've got to keep looking at the fact that this is something which is part of an overall dwelling as well. It is independent living, but there are some restrictions with that. We're not setting up independent units which are, you know, can be moved in by anybody that without a connection to the family. So we have to sort of bear that in mind as well. You know, largely people who are moving into Granny Annex will be part of extended families or whatever, and you would expect them to share facilities in the main residence as well. But certainly we'll have a very close look at that and see if we can improve on that for you.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. I think that's helpful. Councillor Jenny, please.
Oh, thank you. Well, the phrase independent living has arrived at last. I was expecting that a bit earlier, but I sort of thinking through the experience that we had as a family when we were dealing with my mother-in-law some years ago. There was a significant discussion within the family as to whether she actually wanted to be in the main house or she wanted to be have her own independent living in an annex. And I think anybody who is actually going to apply for an annex will have had those conversations with the person that is likely to be living there. So I think the concept is absolutely right. Having decided that somebody needs an annex, then they've got to look at space standards, and there are space standards that exist. The NHBC have space standards, and building regs have space standards. So to pick up Councillor Maxwell's point about wheelchair access, what is suitable for somebody who is in a wheelchair, it will need to be spatially larger than somebody who isn't. It'll also have to have the ability for vertical movement up and down, and you can't do that in sort of the spatial setup that was sort of indicated in the draft example in the documentation. So it's very clear to me that these words about kitchen should not be prescriptive, because the needs for one person will be fine if they're designed for that particular person, but for somebody else they may not be. So and having spent a lot of time writing specifications for these sort of for care homes and that sort of thing, it is a very, very difficult thing to do. So my advice is, quite frankly, to leave it as loose as you possibly can, to keep under review. The important thing for the planning management team to establish, to my mind, is firstly whether there is a need for an annex, and then you can look at all the periphery around it as to whether it fits in and everything like that, and overlooking and so on. But the spatial standards need to be defined by the occupier, and that might even come down to the occupational therapist.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that the points that everybody has made have all been noted. Does anybody else want to speak one more time or not? Okay. Well, thank you. That was a very interesting discussion, and I think that once we unpacked it, as I said earlier, there was much meat in that. So that was an extremely useful discussion. So I turn to the recommendation at 13.1, and that is this committee is recommended to approve the draft residential annexes supplementary planning document attached as Appendix 1 for consultation. It is proposed this consultation should take place over 4 weeks in line with national guidance to allow the consultation to be completed in advance of the pre-election period. May I have a proposer, please?
Very happy to propose, Chairman.
Councillor Mercer, Councillor Jenny.
I'll second it.
Right, okay, Councillor Jenny, thank you.
Is there not a possibility, Mr. Chairman, that there might be some minor amendments?
Yes, well.
Should we not have a recommendation then that allows for that?
Could I just make a point before we come to an agreement? Is there possibly in this document you could actually put that there is electric points for electric cars as part of a requirement, or is that not possible?
No. We've covered that elsewhere.
Yes, indeed.
Sorry?
It's been covered in other documentation.
Right, okay, thank you.
But as far as a minor amendments point, Councillor Lewis, Anne, is that okay if we put a minor amendments clause in for any minor amendments, typographical, etc., to be
agreed with the chair, in conjunction with the chair?
Head of Planning Services in consultation with the chair and vice chair of this committee. Would that be okay?
We can do that.
Okay. Then with that additional paragraph, it is proposed and seconded. Are all those in favour?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Are there any against? And are there any abstentions? Okay. No, that's carried. And that brings us to the end of the substantive business. But before we disappear, nearly an hour early, before we disappear, I'm going to ask Richard and members of the planning policy team, if required, just to give members of this committee, because this is our last formal meeting, a quick verbal update as to where we are with the local plan and any other planning policy matters that might still be active and still be live before East Northamptonshire Council subsumes to the unitary. So Richard, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I mean, a number of members will remember we used to do regular updates on planning policy. I think the day-to-day business has taken over a bit recently. We really haven't had much time to do that. We did obviously provide a report before Christmas in terms of some of the work streams that we were going to focus on, because that, you know, realistically, as you said, there won't be a meeting, certainly not of this planning policy committee, but a meeting at all until probably into the summer now, given the move into the unitary, the pre-election period, the elections, and then new councillors coming on board potentially. So I think it would be fitting to just give you a quick summary of where we are on one or two pieces of work. The local plan, which has obviously been the mainstay of many of these planning policy committee meetings over, you know, last 3-4 years or so. Following the meeting on the 27th of January, as you know, the consultation on the Regulation 19 started on Friday, so that's all on the website. We are making some tweaks to the wording and stuff, but the plan is all on there. The representation form is on there, so the representations can now be made through until the 19th of March. There's an online form there, and it relates very much to it's more of a legal consultation. I know a number of members came along to the presentations that we did online, so that gave you some background to what's happening. I've been in touch with the Planning Inspectorate, letting them know that will be coming to them by the end of March. So once the consultation closes, there will be a summary of the representations. Again, we can make those available through the statement of consultation, which, even though there's no committee, we can share those with yourselves as councillors, so you can get a summary of those and give you the link on the website to where they are as well. In the meantime, what are we doing with the plan? Well, the submission plan is up there for consultation, as I've just said, but we're sort of fine-tuning the graphics and presentation, the layout and the photographs to make it a submission plan that we can be proud of through East Northants, because, you know, we need to get the right balance between the text and the policies to make something that makes a statement that we can be proud of, as I said. In addition to that, I've talked about the potential for a briefing note to go out to all councillors, which might be as early as next week, actually, which would provide some background to what I've just said, because whilst yourselves as planning policy committee members would be aware of the background, a number of councillors, perhaps some other committees, wouldn't be so au fait with some of the detail. Particularly, you know, we want to reach out to those on planning management committee, because I think what is important now is that, because when you approve the plan on the 27th of January as the council's local plan, subject to the examination and the modifications that an inspector may make, that gives it a little bit more weight, if you like, in terms of applying those policies at planning committees and also for delegated applications. It's a difficult point as to how much more weight, but certainly it is something that I think those policies can be used, and you know, it is up to inspectors through appeals, if applications go that way, as to how much weight they decide ultimately to give to those policies. But I think they are policies which we can start to look at now, and certainly, you know, as I say, where there are no objections to those policies, then after the Reg 19, even more weight could be attributed to those policies, particularly when it's submitted to the Planning Inspectorate. And that's not far away, really. It's a 6-week consultation exercise. So that'll be summarised in a briefing note, which is available for all councillors. In terms of other plan work, I think it's just probably a good time just to tell you about the neighbourhood planning side of things. We've been quite successful with neighbourhood planning in East Northamptonshire and going into the new unitary. Yes, we're a sort of more rural district and we have more parishes, but we have probably the lion's share of the neighbourhood plans for the new unitary even now. We've got 10 made plans which are in operation and being used successfully with planning applications that have been coming in. We've got a further 10 plans progressing through the system, most recent ones being Hargrave and Nassington, and officers are working with them to bring those forward as well. We may get to the stage where there are some additional neighbourhood plans. In terms of the very first one when I came into place was Higham, and that's 5 years old now. So, you know, we might get to some that start looking at potential reviews of policies. We've had part reviews, but maybe be looking at revising some of those plans as well. So again, you know, that's something which certainly as officers we would encourage.
Royston is looking at that actually. Royston is actually looking at that.
Right, yeah. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I know there was one or two that were looking at potentially either full or partial reviews as well of policy. So that's to be welcomed as well. Just finally, the SPD work. Well, we've obviously presented one to you tonight, which we've turned around pretty quickly, I think. But there will be others based on the policies from the Part 2 plan, which we, as I say, did a report before Christmas, which spells out what we're doing. As well as that, I'm sure the unitary, that there'll be one or two that we've held back on as we've got nearer to unitary, because the demand is to look at those unitary wide. Obviously, as key councillors in that unitary, you'll have a say and an opinion on those. For example, the affordable housing strategy, when that's sort of formulated for the new unitary, will lead to the need to look at affordable housing, etc., etc. Developer contributions is one that very much is needed, but those sort of documents probably make more sense across the unitary now. So there'll be a lot of new work streams that are being taken on, but officers from what is currently East Northants will also be looking to ensure the policies through the Part 2 plan, and particularly are sort of buoyed up, if you like, with additional documentation, so that it's all about improving the quality of planning applications at the end of the day. Just one final thing, with the land east of the A6 Bedford Road, which was the new site of 400 odd houses, which you obviously approved at the previous planning committee. You know, we're looking to provide a draft brief outlining some of the requirements of that site, because it's quite a substantial site, and I think it would benefit from that. So that's just a quick update around things, Chair. Hopefully that helps members of the committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. I think that was quite useful just to give us a quick snapshot of where we are as we move into this last phase of East Northamptonshire Council. I don't know if anybody does have any brief comments they'd like to make. Brief. Fine if they don't, but okay.
David.
Okay, yeah, Michael. Did you want to?
Thank you. I just want to come in just to supplement what Richard said. Yes, to say we do have obviously other priorities which are coming to the fore now. I know the one that we'd probably all be familiar with that is something that's very pressing that we've sort of put to one side a little bit is the 5-year housing land supply, which we will be over the coming weeks sort of finalising that and having a sort of an up-to-date position now. I think that's very important, because obviously then that will probably, what we'll do, we'll take that to the examination as a sort of updated position, because I mean that's recognised, because currently the local plan, as you're probably familiar, as was discussed at the last committee, is using 1st of April 2019 as a base date, so we need to update those figures. But I mean, we are in the position that we're in, so but there will be, and I think we'll probably be reporting it to members as another briefing note, so that's an important point to take.
Thank you, Michael. And obviously, although this committee is not meeting again until the end of East North Hants Council. It is still formulated. So, you know, if there are comments or anything, you know, you are still members of this committee until East North Hants is duly dissolved. Councillor Mercer, please.
Yes, thank you. We had earlier in the year a lot of government consultation papers, and there was one a week or two ago on which was quite contentious about I think what it was now. It ended February the 2nd. We didn't have it come to this committee because it was about missions, community development rights. That's right. And so we missed out on that. I mean, we were busy with the local plan. It just didn't fit in. There is another one at the moment on design. I haven't looked at it in detail myself, but I don't know whether anyone is proposing to do a consultation response to that, possibly through the JPU. But as we haven't got any more meetings, but I just wondered whether that was being considered.
Okay, Richard, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, yes, Chair, and I think Councillor Mercer's right. I think the Joint Planning Unit were picking up on it. Certainly, we were talking with officers from the wider team about the opportunity to comment on those documents. So it's a matter of timetabling. There's been quite a few coming out of government in a short time when we've been perhaps distracted with other things. So we've not missed the opportunity, because certainly I know, for example, Wellingborough have been reporting, and we've fed into that. So I know we'll become part of the unitary very shortly anyway. So consistency on reply is important, but ultimately, yeah, it's difficult if you can't take it to committee, because you do lose that opportunity to shape it through your committee members. But hopefully, officers can still do responses to that. But we could have a look at a briefing note to, if there are individual sort of councillor responses to it. That's something we could do. Obviously, for the I think Councillor Mercer, you mentioned the design one, which runs a bit later, doesn't it? I'll have to look at the closing date, but we could do.
It's March.
Yeah,
29, something like that. It goes on quite
yeah,
quite a while. I did reply personally to the other one because it's really quite worrying.
Certainly the March one gives us a lot more time. We can have a look at doing something potentially through a briefing note summarising the potential and sort of asking individual council, or asking through that briefing note if there are comments that councillors want to make, then we can take them on board, because effectively what it would be an officer response, which would be supplemented, if you like, through councillor additions. It's a difficult one because we can't bring it to committee, so it can only reflect individual views. Ultimately, we're happy if councillors want to fill it in themselves. We're happy to discuss that with you, which is probably an easier way ultimately, but you know, we're happy to discuss it. And if you've got any questions or thoughts on how things might work, or want to understand things a bit better, again, myself and the policy team happy to spend time and discuss that with you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, we've got Councillor Maxwell, please, and then Councillor Jenny. And then I think that's probably the last comment from the floor. Councillor Maxwell?
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you for the documents you've actually produced, because, you know, they're very clear and concise, and I think it's really helped me personally, I have to say. I would like to say, however, that we can't forget that going into this new era in April, that we don't want to lose the thought that at the end of the day, we have to remember there's residents involved here, and we can't just sort of airbrush them out. So I'd like to think that in the future, that like we are having a consultation, that we keep on going back to residents and listening to their views, what they think, and not just what we think. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, thank you, Councillor, and obviously your comments are important. I mean, I would say that every document that we have ever produced is out for consultation before it's adopted, whether it be an SPD or whether it be the mighty Part 2 local plan or even mightier joint core strategy. Everything is extensively consulted upon, and certainly in East Northamptonshire Council all the time I've been here and before, there was never any desire to airbrush residents out, and I'm sure that spirit will be carried forward into the unitary. Councillor Jenny, please.
Thank you. I just want to slightly tweak what Richard said. We had a discussion amongst the leadership this afternoon about finalising documentation at the last full council. So any minutes or anything like that that have happened prior to full council will be taken to there. Anything as far as consultations that we've just been mentioning, we believe there is already in place a delegation to officers in consultation with the chair of planning policy and the vice chairman of planning policy to actually go through those documents that Councillor Mercer has been talking about and the documents that I was talking about before this meeting. So I would expect that you two guys will actually be dealing with those either from the JPU or from our own internal planning policy team. And I would expect that those decisions will be reported to the final council meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Okay, well, if there are no other last minute remarks, I'd just like to wrap up. I've been chairman of planning policy for rather a long time. My hair wasn't grey when we started, but that was rapidly sorted. And in the time that we've been working together as planning policy team and committee and team on East Northamptonshire Council, we've done some remarkable things. Richard alluded earlier to the fact we've 10 neighbourhood plans that have been made. We've been a strong voice in North Northamptonshire on the Joint Planning Committee and the Joint Planning Unit, and making sure that East Northamptonshire's voice and the desires of its residents as far as possible are reflected in the policies that we've brought forward over the years. And in the midst of an awful global pandemic and in the midst of all the distractions and difficulties that that's caused, I think it reflects enormous credit on the members of this committee and the officers who've supported this committee and the greater area that we've managed to get the Part 2 local plan finalised, sorted as much as we can. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, I know there are still controversies on certain issues of it, and with a local plan there always will be. But we've managed to get that finalised and out for its Reg 19 consultation and then submission as East Northamptonshire Council's not adopted, but East Northamptonshire Council's local plan will then be sent to the Planning Inspectorate, ACOVA Secretary of State. So I think that it does reflect great credit on everybody who's contributed to that. So I'd like to thank every member of this committee. It's not an easy committee to sit on. It takes patience, it takes a great deal of reading, it takes a lot of technical detail. And whether you've been relatively new on this committee or whether you've been an old lag and been on this committee for a long time, every one of your contributions has been very much of interest, listened to, and thrown into the mix. So I think members, it's been a very great privilege for me to chair this committee and to listen to some of the high quality debates and discussions we've had. But of course, none of this would have been possible without two other groups of people, and that are the officers in East Northamptonshire and the Joint Planning Unit at East Northamptonshire primarily, who've supported us steadfastly and loyally throughout all this period and throughout some of the difficulties that we've had. It would be invidious to point names particularly, but particularly Richard, particularly Michael, particularly Anne, and obviously our beloved head of planning services, who regrets that he can't be here tonight, Mr. Bland, Paul Bland. But all the officers, including, you know, Charlie and Louise, who've supported everything that we've done with cheerfulness, and also, you know, with a bit of forensic detail. Not everything that we say is always acceptable or possible, and we've always been carefully, you know, anything we've said has been carefully weighed in the balance. And I think, again, that shows the strength of the team here in East Northants. And of course, lastly, it's all the members of the public and all the people who have made input into all the various documents and all the various policies that we've been trying to get through over the years, and who have fed into all the various consultations and representations that have been made. Again, all your remarks and all the comments that have been made by members of the public have been listened to and taken into consideration. And so I'd also like to thank my vice chairman, the irrepressible Councillor Boto, for all his loyalty and his friendship. It would have been very difficult without his support. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, one and all, members, officers and members of the public, if there are any listening, thank you all very much. And we will, I hope, see many of you on the other side, as they say, but much appreciated. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, 2012, almost world record speed for a planning policy meeting. I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Bye.
Cheers.
Great officers. Well done.
Well done.
See you all soon.
Yeah, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye, David. Thank you.
Feel quite emotional. I think I need a drink.